Trade relations between South Africa and the United States hang in the balance, particularly as President Donald Trump continues to denounce the Expropriation Act. The legislation has signed into law, was signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa last week. But last week, Donald Trump then ordered that all aid, particularly to South Africa, be halted. And that was over that Expropriation Act, among other issues. What would happen then if Trump was to withdraw the African Growth and Opportunity Act? That's AGOA. What happens then? Director of Waymaker Global Trade Solutions, Thina Nodada, joins us to chat a little bit more about this. Thina, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Do we have other options? Does it matter? It seems like it hasn't been a reciprocal sort of relation anyway when it comes to AGOA. We benefit more than the United States does. So one could say it's understandable that at some point they'd say to themselves, why do we need to do this?
For the US or us?
100% for the United States.
Yeah, so no, I think actually we benefit in terms of job creation, but their sectors, the agriculture sector, their vehicle sectors also benefit from what they import from South Africa. And one of the things which you look at is what makes AGOA slightly different to other trade agreements is that you've got preferential trade for products that leave South Africa that go there.
Yes.
Not necessarily that come from the US.
That's what I'm saying.
To South Africa.
The reciprocal nature of it isn't necessarily fully there.
Yes. So the guys they are the ones who are benefiting because they're the ones who want the products. They want the cheaper vehicle parts so that they can manufacture their Fords and their GWMs and put into their parts. So from a reciprocal perspective, it's certainly going to have an impact because it will have job losses. I think in 2021, we did about $13.4 billion worth of exports to the US. 2023, we did about $8.4 billion.
Yeah.
And of that 8.4, about 3.5 billion is done under AGOA.
Yeah.
So I think, Arabile, an important thing to mention is that it's not everything that gets traded between South Africa and the United States is being traded under AGOA. It's not. Only about 1,800 products are liberated under AGOA, are liberalized under AGOA.
Sure.
While 5,000 are under the general system preference, which is applicable to all countries. So it's not a situation, and I'd really like South Africans to understand that, yes, it will have an impact, and it will force the US market to look at basically from a landed cost perspective, is it still feasible to buy these parts, these vehicle parts, for example, and aluminium and steel, for example, from South Africa? Or do we have an alternative? But we must remember that, policies are determined by politicians. Business is done by private sector, where, things like quality of the product that they receive, the transit times to get the product there, and the ability to supply that product. So it's not a simple matter where Trump will say, if it were to happen that he says AGOA is over, that now South Africa's trade with the US comes to an end. No, there's still majority products that can still be traded.
So it's not the be-all and end-all, ultimately.
It's not the be-all and end-all, but it would have an impact, definitely, yes.
I often have a saying that goes, politics gets in the way of good economics, but you can't have economics without politics.
100%.
Right,
100%.
And it's the unfortunate part in all of this. Are we bound to lose something here because politics is just getting in the way? Are we just losing the globalization sense that South Africa has been involved in, and ultimately the world has been involved in, particularly since the early 90s, if not 80s, that has really brought the world together for the most part?
Yeah, look, I think we lose, if it were to happen, worst case scenario, deep relations that have existed with the United States over a long time.
Yeah.
But, if you look at what's happening, if you look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which on its own, from an import perspective, is worth $712 billion. I mean, so those are massive figures.
Is that already installed elements of the African Free Trade Area Agreement, or is that in terms of the potential that could come about from fully putting it in?
That's $714 billion worth of imports is what Africa imported in 2023. That's the value of it.
Is that globally from US, Europe, etc.?
From the whole world. So you're obviously not going to take the whole chunk. We're not going to come in there with other people, but we are still a SADC dominant country.
Yeah.
We've still got East Africa, Central Africa, Northern Africa that we can expand to, that really have a hunger for our products.
Yeah.
And you spoke about agriculture, where our products, our livestock, for example, can adjust and survive in those conditions, whereas the European animals, for example, come in much colder weather conditions, geographic locations, where it's harder for them to survive in these areas.
But can AfCFTA ultimately replace AGOA? So can the African Free Trade Area Agreement replace what we get out of AGOA? As you said, our products, our goods, our vehicles, etc., do have a need or desire in other parts of Africa. Can that ever replace what we get out of the US?
Yeah, if we were to actually really push ourselves, particularly, I mean, if you talk about the aluminium and steel, you talk on the agriculture perspective. On the vehicle side, I don't see too many vehicle manufacturers based in Africa, I don't think.
Yeah.
We have, I think, majority of that. So,
well, you do have Morocco, particularly out of North Africa, who are fighting quite vehemently in that regard.
Okay, so we could look at that market for that matter, but the AfCFTA definitely has the potential to outdo the numbers that we do to the United States of America. That's for sure. That I'm certain of. How we implement it and how we get to it is another element. But I wouldn't want, with the short time that we have, I wouldn't want us to limit it to the AfCFTA.
Sure.
I think you got to look at other trade agreements. We must look at, BRICS not being a trade agreement, but we can capitalize on those relationships to really start seeing products.
Is it time to make that a trade relation? Because right now, what is BRICS?
It's really an agreement between these countries on infrastructure development programs, road development, helping each other on tech development in the countries, for example.
Yeah.
But it's not something that says, because of BRICS, I now have preferential trade on certain items with Russia or India. It hasn't happened. And it's something that keeps coming up, and we'd love to see it go that way. And I think South Africa is in a position to kind of steer that. We find ourselves with Western relations, but then we have China, who's in BRICS. We have Russia there as well. India, who's also a big player from a global scale. So I think South Africa definitely has the potential to offset what losses they could lose by losing AGOA, being removed out of AGOA.
Yeah.
But it won't be immediate. It would take some time. It would take some time for us.
4 years enough time? Because that's how long ultimately Donald Trump will be in office for. And then obviously the hope is that whoever the next president is in the US, that hopefully the thaw relations a little bit better. Do you think 4 years is pretty much enough time for us to recover all of that back?
4 years, I don't think 4 years, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
But if we performed really hard, but you must look at it, for example, the AfCFTA. Every year, they're cutting down 5% on products. It's not an immediate thing that they bring in. So if BRICS were to say, let's go...
Sorry, just explain that to me. So they're cutting down 5% on international goods being brought into Africa. Is that what you're saying?
No. So this is what I'm saying. Because of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, if you are paying 25% to bring oranges into Nigeria from South Africa, every year 5% is being removed off that 25%, so that it gets to zero.
Okay.
But they do not do an immediate impact and say, okay, we've got the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, things are going to be immediately free. No, it has to be phased in over time, over the selected industries that are participants of that.
What about Europe? The European Union ultimately saying, look, Donald Trump is at war with us too. Perhaps it's time for us to be looking at getting into a lot more emerging markets like South Africa.
Europe, we've got great relations. I think we're doing more exports to Europe from an agri perspective.
They've got their own growth issues as well, but still.
But I mean, Europe, we've had, the Euro 1 as well. So our trade relations with Europe are very strong. I'd even probably say on an agri perspective, when you look at the citrus, the nuts, and the wines that are going out to the US, I think Europe actually supersedes the US. So there we've got long-standing relationships with the UK and Europe, I suppose the big question or the big elephant in the room is because of China and the United States having their own tussle, as it was, that perhaps we get stuck in the middle of that, much like we're getting stuck in the middle of the situation between Israel and Palestine as well, and the United States, right? Does South Africa risk becoming, I don't want to call it a pariah, but ultimately one country that the world seems to look at completely differently because of policy and because of politics, and we ultimately lose out economically? Because of some bad political decisions,
100%. Because like we said earlier, politics can get in the way of economics.
No, I mean, look, I think South Africa has always had a slightly controversial political history, and because of apartheid and Nelson Mandela, etc., we still get quite a lot of attention from the international markets. But I really think, from what I see, Arabile, I don't think that we're going to actually be kicked out of AGOA. I think that this envoy that's going to go to, this is my opinion, it's not a fact.
Oh yeah, no, of course.
Don't hold a gun to me. But I don't think it will lead to that, depending on how that engagement goes with the guys, the envoy that's going out to the US.
Yeah.
Where I think we are seeing where the real danger is this aid that has been cut, because the US aid does a lot in Africa and in South Africa from a health perspective, education perspective. Now, when that funding is held back, these development programs almost come to a strong halt, and they move across many different sectors: the mining sector, the agriculture sector. I think there is where it's currently a major concern for us. AGOA would, if we get removed out of AGOA, yes, it will be a problem. And my worry with it is more Elon Musk than Donald Trump. Because he's got a personal attachment to South Africa. If he feels that South Africa doesn't reciprocate the way he wants, he could do that out of spite, but in terms of the need, what does USA gain from removing South Africa out of AGOA? I don't think it benefits them. They do it because they say, in AGOA, the US can remove you as a member state if you don't adhere to democratic principles. I believe that we can prove that this expropriation bill is not against democratic principles within South Africa. And if they're able to do that to the US counterparts, then we shouldn't have an issue with.
But is that not the problem, though? That we now need to justify what's happening in our own country to somebody else who's got their own issues in their country, and we don't ask them to justify what's happening in their country. So we're talking about our own sovereignty here, and it was already a big question mark when President Cyril Ramaphosa had a call with Elon Musk. This is not somebody who's supposed to matter to us as much, despite the South African connection.
No, it's frustrating, because it's the only trade agreement in the world where you'll hear things like this happen, where one country can make threats like this. If you look at, I know BRICS is not a trade agreement, but you've never heard BRICS nations making threats of who's going to be removed. In AFCFTA, that's just come up, or SADC, unless there's something really drastic happening. So what you see in the DRC, what's happening there now, those are the type of things that can create that. But with AGOA, it's always, anything happens. We have a ship that parks in Simonstown and is assumed to be a Russian war vessel, and then we're told we're going to be removed from AGOA. Every 12 months, there's a reason why we're going to be removed from AGOA.
Is it time for us to trust ourselves and to do less with these international relations? And if we do that, that means globalization ultimately is the one thing we're beginning to see less of, and protectionism happens a little bit more.
No, I think we need to expand into other markets. We're not reliant on the US markets, but the AFCFTA cannot be ignored. The Middle East cannot be ignored. And if you read the articles all over, there's big demand there for South African products. The key thing, and in closing, I want to say to you, Arabile, is we must be able to cut down the trade barriers. You would have heard earlier on they speak about these apples going to Thailand. It's been 16 years, and now this has finally been let off the hook. I wish that was the only one. I mean, we find out every day of new ones. Chicken pieces out to East Africa. We're waiting. There's been a visit 5 years back from the Kenya Department of Agriculture that is meant to come to South Africa. It hasn't happened. And it's halting a lot of different, progress. So my hope is to see the GNU really prioritize these things, to try break down the barriers that prevent us even exporting and trading those products.
It's going to take some time, though, isn't it, Thina?
It will.
That's the unfortunate part.
And
we want these things to happen immediately, or at least as close to immediate as possible. 2-3 years. Let's at least get it done.
We wish we could see faster turnaround times.
Why don't we have executive orders in South Africa? Let's get our own executive orders.
I think you must take that to the president.
Tyranny is what might reign. Thina, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.